A Sky Full of Stars by Coldplay can be interpreted as a song that describes the work ethic needed in the payments industry, at least as I see it. The lyrics and overall feeling of the song resonate with fast-paced, complex, and evolving nature of this field. The song's title and the central metaphor, which is a sky full of stars, can be seen as representing the vast, interconnected network of transactions and data that characterizes this modern payments industry. Each star could be a transaction, a customer, a piece of data, all twinkling together to form a beautiful and a functional system. There are a few key skills that I think are needed in the industry. One is adaptability and resilience. Of course, we know the payments landscape is constantly changing with new technologies, new regulations, and professionals need to learn fast and fail fast as well to embrace this culture of continuous improvement and to stay ahead of the curve. Another is analytical thinking and critical thinking. Payments involve massive amounts of data, from transaction patterns to fraud detection. And it's important for us to be able to analyze the data, identify the trends, and solve complex problems that are in this environment in a way to create invaluable, improving efficiencies, security, and customer experiences. Another critical one is communication and collaboration. Of course, we know that our payments environment involves various stakeholders from multifarious backgrounds, banks, fintechs, regulators, and consumers. And therefore, strong communication skills are essential for explaining complex technical concepts to non-technical partners and building trust amongst all these partners in order to deliver successful payment systems. Another is cybersecurity and risk management. With the rise of digital transactions, the threat of cybercrime is on the rise. Fraud is, of course, a major concern for many of the parties within this environment. And it's important for us to keep a keen eye in terms of the detail and develop a solid understanding in terms of cybersecurity principles. And these are critical for us to look after the data which is in our safekeeping, because this data is sensitive, and it's important for us to maintain the trust that the customers have put into us in terms of giving this information or sharing this information. And I think, of course, for me, the last one that I would say is very important is customer centricity. As our market becomes more competitive, it's important for us to focus on the customer experience. We need to be a little more empathetic in terms of understanding the needs and the pain points of our customers. And as with that understanding, we should be able to develop solutions that are secure and efficient, but also friendly and inclusive to all the participants in the payments environment. My work as a project manager and as a portfolio manager at PASA has a significant, though often unseen, impact on the daily financial lives of every South African citizen. As the Payments Association of South Africa, PASA is the management body, and it's recognized by the South African Reserve Bank to organize, to manage, and to regulate its members within the national payment system. Of course, my role within that is to orchestrate projects that shape things like rules, systems, and technologies that sit behind the payments that we or people on a daily basis make. This, of course, goes along with the participation from all the various banks and all the other participants that sit within the ecosystem that forms this complex payment structure in South Africa. Well, I think one thing that's really important for me is to develop some sort of personal hygiene. And that is on a daily basis, I do three things, amongst others, of course, but three things that I think kind of keeps my mind grounded. And after hard days of work or week of work, on a daily basis, I try to get back to a bit of a basic or level understanding in my mind. And three things that are very essential to my well-being is meditation, and I try to do that on a daily basis, at least for just over an hour to 2 hours. And another thing that helps me is sketching. So I do a lot of sketching, doodling, and I enjoy that, especially landscape and also a bit of portrait sketching. I really enjoy that. It gives me a sense of accomplishment. And then writing. Of course, I've been bad for a little while now, but writing has always been a bit of a solace for me in the sense that it allows me to gather my thoughts, to put things into perspective. Sometimes, of course, we become irrational by so many different things: the rush, the hustle, the bustle, the daily activities, the stresses that we face both at work and at home and in the traffic, of course. But writing, of course, helps me develop a bit of perspective, at least at the end of the day, towards the evening, where I start to put these thoughts together, and then I realize sometimes, well, you've been foolish sometimes in the way you've reacted on certain things. So it gives me a renewed perspective on a daily basis. And yeah, I have been a little bad over the last few weeks, but hopefully after this conversation, I'm going to try and get back to that with a little more seriousness. The one thing that I love to do is dumb things down. I find that things get so complicated and people just overcomplicate things or understandings. And of course, everyone comes from their own perspective, which is very difficult because we're all trying to get to a common point, yet we all have a perspective on how to get to that common point. And I try as much as possible to dumb things down, to simplify it, and sometimes oversimplify it, but that's something that I tend to or like to do. Of course, that doesn't happen all the time because sometimes we're under a lot of pressure to get things done, and sometimes we rush by without even understanding each other or understanding what it is that's going to satisfy all parties. But I think what for me is very important, and I try my best to do, especially in industry meetings and when we come together to formulate projects or to deliver projects, is try to figure out how do we get to the simplest way to deliver the task and to allow for everyone to understand what we're trying to do. Growing up, I wanted to be a scientist. And I'd often gaze up into the sky and think there has to be so much more out here. And I remember that so clearly growing up in a small town in Mpumalanga. But I always thought that there had to be a lot of complexity that sits behind everything that we see around us. And I thought it was always an important thing to try and understand what is my role and how I fit into this bigger plan. However, as the reality of political economics hit me, my perspective decided to change. And I started to see and started to appreciate the why, of course. But also I found out that it's also very important to try and figure out the how, especially the how in our everyday lives. And as I did this, my career plan evolved. And over years, of course, I found myself drawn to payments. Initially, as I came into payments, it was very much at a technical level and solving at a technical level for all of these complex problems and developments that we needed to do. But that also evolved, and that started to turn its face towards a deeper fascination on payments. And I realized that, yes, there's this science that sits behind payments, which we might call a bit on the technical side, but there's also an art in a sense. And the art is more from a perspective of how do we shape payments? How do we see and solve for the many, you could say, stakeholders that sit within this world? And how do we see the bigger picture in terms of simple payments fitting into the bigger picture of South Africa, but South Africa fitting into the bigger picture of the world. So that fascination of trying to figure out how bigger things work kind of turned its attention from pure science and moved into something more relevant to us, like payments as an example. And yeah, I'm happy to be in this space. That's pretty much how I got to where I am. So my role at PASA is twofold. One as a project manager, and to put it very simply, my job is to help to build new things or to enhance systems, regulations that might already be there or rules that might already be there. And you can imagine trying to build a giant Lego castle. So my job is to make sure that we have all the right Lego pieces, that all the builders know what their part is and what they need to do, and to make sure that we all moving towards a single target. We have a delivery date. And ultimately, of course, we're all doing the same thing for this payment system and making sure that we have everything that we need to empower people to move money and to enable South Africa's economy. As a portfolio manager, I look at all the different castles that we've built, and there's a few of these castles, and I try and figure out, okay, amongst them, which is the more important ones, and how do we actually move resources from one to the other to balance the load in the sense, but also to make sure that we are moving towards the targets and we're delivering these various projects or castles that we're building or these Lego blocks at the same time, but also to give those that are overseeing it within my team at least the confidence and the skills or the development for them to do what they need to do. Payments wasn't something that I initially thought I would get into. I got into banking, and I had a wide experience in banking. And as some of us might know, banking in the older days was something you would have to know from start to end. And they all sit within, as an example, starting off in a branch, a lot of the functions that are now sitting in central hubs used to sit in the branch environment. So you're very exposed to sales, to credit management, you're exposed to the operations of the bank, and you're also exposed to meeting customers, developing relationships. So I was fortunate in that sense that I was able to have the full array of banking experience. And as that happened, I started to become a little more technical through the bank, of course, in terms of trying to do more technical things. And I got into, at that point in time, it was called branch network support. And from there, my world kind of opened up to more the technical part of banking. And I found a vacancy. So in other words, I almost, like you could say, accidentally bumped into payments. And I think the greatest thing for me was in the payments journey, I was fortunate enough to have many great mentors. And the mentors were able to not just give me deeper technical understanding of payments, but also to help me in thinking of the bigger picture. And I was very fortunate. So I would say it's not in particular one person who helped shape my career in payments or allow for my career to be shaped in payments. But I think it was a collective of people, great people that I've met along the way that's helped me develop a great mindset in this. And of course, there's so much more learning. And I think the more I know, truthfully, the more I feel I need to know. So, yeah. So, of course, the primary topics that I'm involved in from a training perspective is authenticated collections, or known as debit check, and registered mandates. And of course, I'm sure many of you already know what authenticated collections is. But we pretty much focus on mandates, and mandates that have been authenticated by or approved by a payer via his bank, and which allows now that mandate to sit on a centralized database. So when payments run against it, so those payments can be validated, and the client has a high level or high degree of certainty that the payments that he's desired to go through his account are being processed, and not any unwanted debits or any unwanted amounts that are now being raised against his account goes through his account. So authenticated collections very much forms that piece, and that's one of the things that I assist in terms of education at PASA. From a registered mandates perspective, which is the other one, that's, as you know, it's about getting mandates onto a registered mandate system, a centralized system that allows payments again to be validated against mandates. It doesn't have, you could say, the strict principles that are there for the authenticated debits. However, what it does afford is the client having a view of what debits is going to hit his account, and then having the ability or right of reply if things are not as he had desired it to be. I would say three things stick out for me in terms of being in payments, wanting to be in payments, and having a longer term career in payments. And that is, number one is, we're very much in an evolving market in South Africa. And we find ourselves continuously, things are changing. So I love that. I love the fact that we're evolving. It's not stagnant. You're not doing the same thing. Things are moving, and you need to be part of that move and push forward. The other thing that I love about it is the complexity, especially the complexity that we have faced in the South African economy, which is very different from most countries around the world. And in that, where we sit is that we are challenged to help assist in terms of moving this economy forward. But in order to do that, we have to understand that. And to understand that is not easy. And it's not a constant. And so that's something that I really love, the ability to twist and tease the brain in order for getting to an answer, making sure, or trying our best as possible to serve the market. And that leads me to the third point, and that is the ability to make a difference. I think for me, that's key. That's probably the biggest thing for me in life in general, as well as in payments, is that whatever I do, if I find myself not making a difference, then I guess what's the point of it? So for me, payments is about making a difference, and making a difference in ordinary people's lives, as well as the lives of others who are actually stimulating the economy in South Africa. And in South Africa, we really find this two worlds, and sometimes they're so far apart from each other, and we find ourselves in the middle, trying to bring these two pieces together and trying to make a difference. I really love that part of being in payments.